Hello and welcome to episode 336 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian.
Hello,
What's
Jason.
up?
It's Wednesday, September 10th, and by the time the podcast comes out, you and I will be on our way to Los Angeles to hang out for the weekend together and with hundreds of other AvGeeks. I am very excited.
That's true. When this comes out, I will be on a Delta 767 operating with the flight number 747.
Oh, I hate when they do that. I hate when they do that.
That's a thing. But I don't know if maybe this is a repeat, but maybe we talked about this earlier. But all of the flights, Delta flights between JFK and LAX, have aircraft-themed flight numbers, which is fun, like Delta 747, 767, 757. Let's see what's operating right now. I got to go past all the boring ones. There's Delta 707, 738, 742, 747, 752, 767, and 773.
So I went from hating it to appreciating it very, very much.
You got to appreciate
now
it.
That
but every now and then, the Delta 747 seems to always be operated by 764. So close.
Okay.
But please tell me 767 is operated by a 767, and it is a 763. So real heavy AvGeek influence.
There you go.
On that route.
I appreciate that.
The sole reason I fly Delta between
the sole reason.
The
sole reason. All right, fair enough. So anyone who's listening to the podcast coming out on Friday, we hope to see you there if that's in your plans for the weekend. And you'll hear more about the adventure over the weekend on next week's episode. And hopefully we'll hear from some friends. We'll see who we run into over the course of the weekend and if we can get them to come on the podcast and chat for a little bit. Last night, on the 9th of September, Russian drones made their first incursion into Polish airspace, or I should say en masse, because there were a lot of them. The effects on commercial activity were pretty quick, and everything just kind of moved west as NATO allies came in with Dutch F-35s. There was the NATO MRTT that was visible last night, and I'm sure there were many, many other things that were not visible on ADS-B. But commercial traffic moved west. The airport terminal and center areas around Warsaw, Modlin, Lublin, and Rzeszów were all closed. And those remained closed until about 6:30 or so this morning, local time. That impacted a few dozen flights. Thankfully, everything was overnight as far as commercial impact is concerned. But as far as a new development in, I guess this is the war in Ukraine spilling over, maybe, but a troubling development if this becomes a regular occurrence.
Yeah.
Because certainly there are already huge workarounds with the inability to fly through Ukraine. If this affects commercial air traffic even wider, the problem just continues to get worse and worse.
Yeah, and I know this wasn't just an incursion. There were also, I believe, shoot downs of drones. So it wasn't just, look, Russian drones are busting our airspace. They're busting our airspace and we're having to shoot them down and get them out of our airspace. So it became a hot area that you definitely don't want civilian aircraft in. And honestly, I think the most impacted the region would be if you had to close eastern Polish airspace, ironically, would be flights transiting Polish airspace to get to Russia. So that would be an ironic twist.
Yeah, the irony last night of the largest number of flights having to be rerouted were the flights that are operating between Turkey and Russia was certainly not lost on me.
No, certainly stinks for Finnair being involved in this as well, since this is right.
Finnair, Air Baltic,
yeah.
Two kind of real strong impact, already skirting at the margins of being able to fly around and still make it to destinations. So it's definitely something that we'll be watching closely to see if this flares up again.
Yeah, none of that is good.
No, none of it is good. In St. Martin,
Speaking
a
of
WestJet 737 had a hard landing over the weekend and managed to collapse the right main landing gear. This is not WestJet's first St. Martin incident.
No, definitely it seemed like WestJet seems to get itself a bit in trouble in St. Martin more than the average airline, which is funny because they're probably one of the least frequent carriers there, at least compared to like Delta, American, United. But I think it was, a couple years ago, and this is really all the benefit of having so many webcams, automated webcams at St. Martin viewing everything. You see more than you would ordinarily see. I think there was a very, very, very low approach during inclement weather at St. Martin from a WestJet. Maybe a 767 back then.
No, it was a 737 because it was a special livery. It was,
okay.
I want to say one of the Disney liveries.
Yeah, so that was caught on camera. And so was this one with quite good production values, if I do say so myself. If you're familiar with St. Martin, and if you're listening to this podcast and you're not familiar with St. Martin, what the heck are you doing listening to this podcast? But anyway, it is a single runway airport. So unfortunately, the airport was entirely closed for nearly 24 hours, I think, as the aircraft was stuck on the runway with a busted right main landing gear. But St. Martin, I guess the staff there, and even down to the corp comms and social media team, they did a phenomenal job, not just removing the stricken aircraft off the runway, which involved heavy lift machinery, which is probably not all that easy to source on an island like that, but keeping passengers up to date on social media throughout the airport closure. They did a phenomenal job. So hats off.
Absolutely. I appreciate how they used the crane to raise the aircraft up, and then they backed a flatbed truck underneath the wing.
And then backed it out.
And then had the flatbed truck drive underneath the wing while they tugged the aircraft off the runway. I thought that was really...
You do what you got to do, because places like St. Martin, the airport is kind of the lifeline of the island.
Absolutely.
Almost everything that comes in and out, except for like that one little weird barge that has 50-foot shipping containers on it that comes from, I think, San Juan. Like, that's it. Everything else coming in and out of the island either comes on a cruise ship or comes on a commercial flight. And I don't think they take a lot of cargo on cruise ships. So it was imperative that they get that out of there real quick. But this was very similar to, the Alaska Air 737, I think at John Wayne, was it? That the landing, it was hard, but it didn't look all that hard to get to the dramatics of a busted main landing gear and a evacuation on the runway. This was one of WestJet's oldest 737, so I can't imagine we'll be seeing it back in the future, but we've been surprised many times before. But I feel like there's going to be a lot of similarities to that other incident where they look under the hood and go, oh yeah, there's kind of a lot more corrosion here than the last time we looked.
Right. So what Jason's referencing is August 20, is actually just almost 2 years ago exactly. Yeah. August 2023, hard landing, because it happened during a storm. Everyone assumed that the storm had something to do with it and it was a hard landing. But when they investigated, they found that there was poor maintenance on the trunnion pin in the landing
that's
gear.
right. It was the old trunnion pin.
The old trunnion pin. Yeah. So again, wait for the investigation to see whether or not it was just a hard landing or if there was something else going on there. Earlier this week, the NTSB released its preliminary report on the Delta Flight 56 turbulence incident that happened on the 30th of July over Wyoming. So this was Delta Flight 56 from Salt Lake City to Amsterdam. And the aircraft was climbing from 35,000 feet to 37,000 feet, reached 37,000 feet, and then needed to move around some weather. The NTSB says the pilot said, hey, can we go right around the weather? ATC said, why don't you go left? They went left. They flew for a few more minutes, and then all of the flight attendants started bouncing around the cabin. Because as it turns out, while 18 people of the 24 passengers who were evaluated by EMTs went to the hospital, the only injuries sustained were by those of the cabin crew. So 2 members of the cabin crew sustained serious injuries and 5 sustained minor injuries. The balance of the 234 people sustained no injuries, according to the NTSB. So that is super interesting in its own right, because that means that everyone was probably belted in, and that probably prevented a lot more injuries.
Well, that is something I feel like we don't often get to say. So hate to see anytime any crew, including flight attendants, are injured. They were probably up and about doing the service. But Wow, good job,
Yeah.
Delta passengers, apparently, for potentially all having your seatbelts fastened. Look at you guys following directions and little lights. Good on them.
And little lights. So the aircraft had an overspeed event exceeding the maximum operating speed of the aircraft by between 15 and 20 knots. And then an updraft carried the aircraft from 37,000 to 38,000 feet over the course of about 20 seconds. During that time, the autopilot disengaged. Then the aircraft descended rapidly all the way down to 35,500 feet. And that cycle repeated about 2 or 3 times over the course of 2.5 minutes. The first officer was the pilot flying, and they initiated the all-attitude upset recovery strategy, which allowed them to recover the aircraft and re-engage the autopilot. The aircraft and everyone on board landed safely in Minneapolis a little while later. The NTSB, to its credit, discusses why they diverted to Minneapolis, saying that there was no weather there and they felt comfortable with the ability to land there based on runway length and lack of adverse weather and some other factors. So I thought it was interesting that they included that in the preliminary report, and good on them.
Yeah, you never want to divert somewhere for a medical emergency where you might create more injuries. So that all makes sense, doesn't it?
So we'll keep an eye on the investigation for a final report, which I'm sure will be much more in depth as to the weather and the process between the crew and air traffic control and their suggestions about ways to get around that weather. The link in the show notes to the preliminary report has a graphic from the National Weather Service radar imagery at the time of the accident that shows the Delta flight flying basically into the most strenuous storm activity on the map. So some interesting things there about how that all transpired that I'm curious to see.
I would love to read when the NTSB dives into why the crew wanted to go right, but ATC made them go left. Quite interesting, since the crew presumably has the best look at the weather with their onboard weather radar. And then I guess they could have just declined that turn and gone with what they thought was safest, but there's all sorts of circumstances in busy airspace to take into account there. So very much looking forward to seeing that.
Exactly.
You can't just go wherever you want, anytime you want in that kind of airspace. But very interested to read in the future why the crew wanted to go right. ATC said left.
Yeah. So we'll keep an eye out for the final report on that one. Also in the preliminary report column this week, we have an Air Canada Rouge Airbus A319 that landed short in Nashville. This particular landing resulted, thankfully, in no one being injured, a few broken runway lights, but the NTSB is investigating the incident that occurred on the 14th of August. Just some preliminary pictures, and the narrative thus far shows that there was a line training captain and a candidate captain who was manually flying the aircraft. They encountered heavy rain at about 200 feet above the ground, and the aircraft then descended too soon and touched down in the grass before the paved
even
area
before the
of
displaced
runway.
threshold. Like,
Yeah.
it's a pretty significant displaced threshold there, and they missed that too.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to get more into this because the preliminary report discusses the fact that the training captain in the right seat could see fine, and the candidate captain in the left seat couldn't. And so that's interesting to me. And what's also interesting to me is the NTSB mentions that the captain asked if he should go around despite not being able to see, and what transpired after that is unclear as to what the discussion exactly was.
Reading a quote here from a Flight Global article, and it goes, although he asked the line training captain whether a go-around should be initiated, good job asking that, pilot in training. That's the question you should be asking. It goes on to say the line training captain could see the runway environment despite the rain distortion and, quote, believed the aircraft was on the glide path, it adds. Clearly, they were not. And it goes on to say as the thrust levers were retarded to idle, The candidate captain was startled to see the runway threshold lights directly ahead of the aircraft's nose. Yeah, I'd be startled about that too. Not great, but if you are the candidate pilot there, I think you passed the test. And I think the roles are a little reversed there, huh?
That'll be interesting to find out.
The student becomes the teacher.
In the last bit of incident discussion that we have for this week, we have some EMAS to talk about. I love EMAS.
EMAS is great because it's just crunchy concrete. Crunchy concrete can save the day, and the FAA would love you to know that it saved the day not once, but twice on September 3rd. Busy day for EMAS saving wayward business jets. One was a Gulfstream G150 at Chicago Executive, which apparently our good friend Josh...
That EMAS gets a lot of repeat business.
Apparently at Blaine Plains on the Blue Skies, Josh, who is a pilot based in the Chicago area, I believe, says he believes this is the number 3 save at Chicago Executive. That's a lot of saves there. And another was a Challenger 300 at Boca Raton. That one, I believe, or the first one at Chicago Executive busted. Nope, that looks like Florida. I'm going to say this one was in Florida. Went through kind of at an angle, the EMAS, and then busted through a fence along the perimeter road. And the one in Chicago, I believe, I might have these flipped, but that one firmly dug into the EMAS and stopped cold, which is exactly what you want to see.
The one in Chicago ended up almost on the street.
Yeah, man, Chicago's got a history of that, huh?
We do, both with private and commercial aircraft. But that's a really interesting point, because one of the things to keep in mind as far as EMAS goes is it's most effective. It's kind of like the Titanic and the iceberg, where you think trying to steer out of the way
you gotta
would be helpful.
Head on.
You need to go into it head on, because it only works if you put all of the mass of the aircraft into the EMAS.
Yeah, it looks like the one in Chicago.
We should probably say what EMAS stands for, which is Engineered Materials Arresting System. It's
crunchy concrete.
Basically crunchy concrete, as Jason said. It crumbles under significant... You can drive a car on it, but you can't drive an airplane on it.
You shouldn't drive a car on it, nor should you even step on it. You shouldn't even look at it. But if you drive an airplane through it, it's going to crumble apart as the landing gear of the aircraft, or presumably the aircraft fuselage. It doesn't even have to be the landing gear, but it will crumble under the weight of whatever's on top, significantly slowing whatever it is down on top of it. But it looks like in Chicago they hit it at an angle, but went through most of it, seemingly, like a lot of it. But the one in Boca, they were not exactly dead center, but they hit it kind of straight on. Firmly planted. There you go. And kind of a hard message to really stick to pilots that, hey, there's this thing at the end of the runway, and if you hit it, you're in a huge amount of trouble, but it's going to save your butt probably. So try to hit the thing you never want to hit square
Aim for the middle.
Aim for the thing that's going to be a real problem for your career. Or not. Maybe we have no idea what the circumstances were of these. They could have been both mechanical. Who knows? But we love EMAS.
Investigations forthcoming.
Yes.
Last week, we talked about Ryanair's threat and moves to remove 1 million seats from Spain due to their...
You didn't do it again. You got to say it like Dr. Evil.
1 million seats.
There it is.
So we talked about Ryanair's side of the story, basically. Well, as soon as we hit stop on the recording, which is usually how these things go, the chairman and CEO of ANA, the Spanish Airports Authority, issued a statement of their own. And as far as corporate statements go, this one is probably one of the most interesting, humorous, striking, and well laid out statements I've seen in a very long time.
If you're hitting back at Ryanair, like, this is exactly what you got to do.
They brought a variety of receipts. Jason, yes. Here are some things that I learned from this particular statement.
Okay.
1, and I think most importantly, no supernatural demonic force compels Ryanair to be one of ANA's biggest customers and to sell its tickets to more than 60 million people traveling to and from Spain.
Huh. I mean, they ruled out supernatural, but they didn't rule out intergalactic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It might be that.
There might be aliens controlling Ryanair. We don't know.
So the supernatural demonic forces come in very late in the statement, but what the statement does lay out, and we'll put a link to this in the show notes because I think it's worth reading its entirety for the kind of other side of the story here, in that Ryanair is demanding to not pay this charge that is basically mandated by law. And they're saying, well, okay, forget it. We're just going to leave. And the airport authority is going to say, we can't really do anything about this because the government has said this is how much things need to cost. This is part of the regulatory regime in which we operate. And those are just the costs. There's not much we can do here. And then they lay out how Ryanair has operated within Spain, how they've benefited from some of these things, how Ryanair has asked for things that aren't really possible. And they say that the additional charges amount to approximately €2 per passenger.
I mean, when Ryanair fares are €10, that's like 20%. But not really. But even the beginning, the very first sentence of this sets the tone. And I'll read it verbatim. It would be hard to find in contemporary business history another case such as Ryanair, where the dissonance between a company's operational excellence and the dishonesty of its communications policy is so striking. Woo, they started hard.
And it goes on from there. It would be fun to do a dramatic reading of the entire thing, but I don't think we have that kind of time, so we're just going to move on. There's a link in the show notes to the full statement if you so choose to read that. Other interesting statements this week, we have United Airlines CEO Scott Kirby saying that the ultra low-cost carrier model in the US is dead. It's done. It's just gone.
I mean, all indications are kind of pointing to that maybe being true. Frontier and Allegiant still kind of making it work, but there certainly isn't room out there for Frontier and Allegiant and Spirit, at least.
I think the interesting thing here is that the ultra low cost model in the US, there are so many US specific things here that go into it not working as well as it works elsewhere. And so I think that's worth, kind of exploring long term. Maybe we can get into that later. But it was just one of those things where Kirby just came out and said it. And
he's been doing that a lot recently.
Yeah, he has. But he also said some things that were interesting to me. Kirby said, surprising customers with fees doesn't work.
I mean, United isn't exactly free of surprising anyone with fees. They do have plenty of their own.
It's like if you have a big enough network and enough planes, you can get away with some of this.
He's not wrong, but
he's not wrong, but also there's a little bit of pots and kettles calling each other names.
Yeah, I guess as one of the world's largest airlines, they can get away with saying a lot, including directly calling out, hey, we're ramping up these routes because Spirit's probably going to die soon, more or less, not the exact words, but damn near close to it. United's getting real frisky with what it has to say in the market these days. And again, it's probably not wrong. I'm not going to say the ULCC market model is dead in the US. I don't think that's true. Otherwise, Allegiant wouldn't still be a thing. Frontier wouldn't still be a thing, but they are still very much a thing. So I don't know. I don't know what it's not a great model in the US, but it's certainly not dead.
I agree with Jason's assessment here.
Fantastic.
Flush with mystery cash, Avelo has ordered 50 firm and 50 optional Embraer E195 E2s. So this will be in addition to the 737 fleet that it currently operates. And it'll bring the E195 E2 to the US for the first time.
Yeah, I guess Avelo's not a ULCC. It's an LCC or something. Are they a ULCC?
ish.
That's
Sort
why
of?
I bumped this up at the last second because it's a good transition. But like, I guess they're not a ULCC, but there's something like it. I'm not really sure what you want to call it. But this has been a weird year for Avelo. Remember, this was the same airline that earlier this year was apparently so close to the brink of death that they had no choice other than to accept a contract from ICE to operate deportation flights, which is a whole other can of worms that I'm not sure we're going to open up on this podcast, but they were so short on cash that they had no choice to do this. Otherwise, they would face imminent demise. But now, just a couple months later, apparently they've got enough cash to order 50 firm E195 E2 plus 50 options.
And we're not sure where that investment came from yet.
Their biggest cash infusion, they said, since inception, since the beginning of this airline. So I'm real conflicted. Like, I love to hear E195 E2 having a U.S. customer. If you're Porter, you're also thrilled about this because it's all sorts of good news for you and the supply chain in North America. But not a big fan of Avelo right now. Don't know what they're going to do with up to 100 E195s in addition to the 737s. It's exponential growth for that airline. Rumors out there that they're also plotting for the demise of Spirit and will aim to capture as much as they can, but the first delivery won't take place until 2027, so they've got a bit of a wait until that.
We'll see where they end up with those in a few years' time. On the other side of U.S. Embraer news, JetBlue has officially retired its last Embraer E190.
Oh, this one hits home. I have been flying JetBlue since before the days of the E190, which it was the launch operator of way back in 2005. Interesting note, JetBlue's current Chief Operating Officer, Warren Christie, captained both the first and final flights of the E190 at JetBlue, which is pretty cool. The final flight operated the most boring route possible between JFK and Boston, but did so on time, which is, no small feat for JetBlue operating out of JFK. But this is somber for me. I love the E190, and now there are no more E190s in the U.S. anywhere. American retired its during COVID. JetBlue retired its E190s just a few days ago. They are a spectacularly comfortable airplane. JetBlues were great, even though the interior hasn't been updated since introduction in 2005 with the tiny little TVs. But the big windows make up for it. So, it was nice.
If you want to fly on an E190, there's still sort of a chance to do so. The best way, in the US at least, the best way to do it is to charter a Breeze airplane, because that gets you an E190, or find one of the routes where they're having problems with the A220, and then you can fly on that route because they're putting those into sporadic commercial service because they're having all sorts of issues the way all other A220 operators.
Yeah. Bermuda Air also, I believe, took a couple E190s, but those are not domestic U.S.
Right,
flights.
not U.S. airlines, because you could still fly on Aeromexico Connect if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Really
Air Canada got rid of its E190s too. It's just disappointing that such a nice, comfortable airplane is really just not something you find in the U.S. anymore. And I'm not thrilled that Avelo of all airlines is taking the E195 E2. It is what it is.
So let's talk about comfort for a minute, because there are a lot of options for getting comfortable on an airplane, all the way from incredibly luxurious first class suites down to new construction economy seats that are built for comfort in the economy cabin. We've been struggling lately with being able to actually put those onto aircraft. And so when we come back from a quick break, we're going to talk with John Walton, welcome him back to the show, and learn more about aircraft interior certification, delivery, and why we've seen so many problems for the last few years and why it might not be getting better anytime soon. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We are joined for the first time in a long time, far too long, by John Walton, who is now the editor-in-chief of The Upfront. And John's expertise is going to take us inside a lot of the new aircraft certification that's coming out inside the cabin. He is recently back from Toulouse and has a lot to share about what's going on, not only with a launch of a new A330neo customer, but what's happening generally with certification and compliance within the cabin. So, John Walton, welcome back to AvTalk.
Thank you very much. It is a delight to be back.
Hey, John, happy to have you back. So I know we'll get there, but we kind of open this segment as talk to us about certification. I think we have to focus more on the lack of certification for things. Do we want to jump straight to that or talk about your fun trip to Toulouse?
Up to you. Let's talk about my fun trip to Toulouse and then we can dive into certification.
I am not
later.
Jealous at all. Nope, not one bit.
Also, it is a delight to go to Toulouse. It's only 30 degrees, so 86, 87 Fahrenheit, rather than having gone somewhere early in the summer where it was 40 degrees or 120 or whatever that comes out to. It was a very lovely temperature to be looking at airplanes.
Must have been very nice for you.
No, completely.
Jason is clearly very accepting of this.
Yeah.
Tell us more. What were you doing?
So I was there for the delivery of the Air Côte d'Ivoire A330-900neo. This is Air Côte d'Ivoire, who are the national airline of the country of Côte d'Ivoire, known in English as Ivory Coast, which is in West Africa, and has been the national airline for a decade and a bit, if memory serves, and currently operates mainly A320 family aircraft and some Dash 8s. And this is their first long-haul aircraft, which they have procured through some development bank funding and have flown home to Abidjan yesterday or today, I think it was. So as we record on the 4th or 5th of September, whichever day we're on.
Very nice. For such a small airline in a part of the world you don't typically hear much about, I feel like they've always kind of been punching above their weight a little bit. They have, one A320neo and a couple CEOs, but way back when, years ago, they had Wi-Fi. No airline of that size has Wi-Fi, at least back then. So it's really interesting to keep hearing about this relatively minuscule airline in the news. Why the 330neo?
Well, so it is largely a state-owned airline economic development play from Côte d'Ivoire and the Ivorian government, which we saw because the great and the good of the government were there last night, including the First Lady of Côte d'Ivoire, the Minister for Transport, the Minister for Culture and Francophonie, so of the French-speaking, 2 ambassadors, a consul general. You get the idea. This is essentially a move to enable more, cheaper and better connectivity through Abidjan, the capital of Côte d'Ivoire, not just as an origin and destination point, but as a connection point for the rest of West Africa as well. So the idea is essentially that Air Côte d'Ivoire will, in addition to operating these flights, be adjusting or rebanking the rest of its operations so that it can bring people in from other airports in the region, which may or may not be well served internationally, and connect them to, initially, Paris.
Very nice.
So the A330neo seems to be the aircraft of choice for airlines that are reaching out into new service. I mean, you really have got the 787 versus the A330neo at this point as far as new service is concerned. They're doing something different with this aircraft, though. I mean, it's a 4-class aircraft.
It is. It's 4-class and it's very high J, which is industry lingo for high business class, J being one of the codes that we talk about when we talk about booking codes for business class. This plane has 242 seats on it, which is 3 seats more than the current maximum on an A321neo of 239 at Wizz Air.
Super low density.
It's super low density, largely driven by the fact that it has 44 business class seats, plus 4 seats in first class at the front of the plane, 3 rows of premium economy, 21 seats, and just 173 economy class seats.
First class? I mean, this is an airline that never had anything higher than narrow body recliners up in business class on narrow bodies. And now they've gone full in 44 business class and 4 first class seats. Why on earth do they have first class? There better be a good reason.
Well, the phrase first class for free comes to mind, which is a phrase that Thomson Aero Seating have used for quite some time. About 6-7 years ago, they first introduced this first class for free concept with their Vantage XL staggered product. People might be familiar with that on Delta's A350s and indeed A330neos, on Virgin Atlantic's A330neos, and a number of other airlines, Qantas, for example, SAS. The way that the tessellation or the patterning of these aircraft layouts work is that at the front, and the very front row of the cabin, you don't have to overlap with another seat in front. So you can take that space and give it over to being a larger business class passenger. And that's what we at the upfront call studio class, right? Because we've got to define this kind of front row business plus first minus kind of position. And we're just calling it studio class, right? JetBlue called it Mint Studio. United is calling it Polaris Studio. It just a quick and easy way to explain the sort of the way that the seats at the front of the cabin, which before might just have been like, oh, this is a nice seat to have, right? Or, oh yeah, that's definitely the one you want to pick and one the airline might well hold back for top-tier frequent flyers, right? Now this is a fully monetized product. And what's on board Air Côte d'Ivoire is very similar to what's on board Virgin Atlantic with the Retreat Suite, or Shanghai Airlines, or China Eastern with their version of the product. And essentially it looks like a big business class seat, and instead of having the bit of seat in front of you, it opens up. And you have more space, which means you have a lot more foot room. Your feet don't have to be sort of tucked into that little footwell in front of you. There's a big screen, like it's a really impressively large screen. Everybody from Miss Côte d'Ivoire 2025 to the First Lady of Côte d'Ivoire were remarking on how big and impressive this screen looks, right? And it is.
Somebody should tell American.
Yeah, well, precisely. What Jason is referring to there is American Airlines, in its version of the studio class, has the exact same size of screen as in the rest of the cabin.
TV for ants.
An enormous bezel around it, which makes it look about the size of an iPhone 4. It is tiny, and it just didn't need to be like that.
It reminds me of the seatback screen from the old 252 777s with that
the little postage stamp square thing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. I asked the people who would know how long it would take to recertify that. 2 years. If you wanted to put a new screen on that.
Okay, so if we want to jump straight into the certification conversation.
Sure.
This has been something that has been plaguing this sector of the industry for, I think it predates COVID. Realistically, COVID just kind of made everything a whole of a hell lot worse. What the heck is going on with seat certification? Because if there's anyone I trust to give us the straight answer, it's you.
Well, thank you. We always like to be upfront about these things.
There.
Yeah, and so look, the reason why this segues nicely is because of the 21 premium economy seats on Air Côte d'Ivoire, the second and third row of 7 are currently blocked off for certification problems. I've been chasing this down since I discovered it, when I literally walked onto the aircraft and wondered, hey, why is there a giant metal bar across these 2 rows of seats? Nobody there could tell me. It is not for my comfort because it says no stowage, no seat in both English and then in French. And the French says don't place anything here, but obviously in French. And this is it's the latest in a number of certification problems.
So it's not just a small airline new plane problem, since we're seeing this with entire fleets of aircraft from Delta's 321neos, United's 321neos, American's 321neos, and Lufthansa's
entire business class.
What is happening?
So you're right in saying it isn't new. It has become magnified recently. The problem essentially is, well, the problem is different depending on whether you're looking at business class or premium economy. Let's start in premium economy, of which there are some read acrosses to business class. The problem, as it's been explained to me by people who know, including the seat maker, is essentially that the regulators, EASA in this instance, are requiring further demonstrations of compliance than they had previously requested. Now, that's a very difficult way of saying they want more proof that the thing is safe, and in different ways than they previously wanted it. So previously, you would be able to, for example, say, well, this seat is materially the same as the previous seat that we certified, and we certified that using this method. Therefore, it will work the same. And then the regulator could either say, yeah, that sounds right, or no, you can't do that. And so, yeah, essentially it's a tightening of these existing requirements, including physical testing, which is where the delays start creeping in, because When you test, you have to shoot the seat down a sled, which is essentially the same thing that you do with a crash test dummy for a car, except in reverse. So the aviation version of these, they use acceleration instead of deceleration because they are exactly the same force. So you don't have the seats slamming into the end of the track. What happens, it's reverse, and you have the dummies slamming to the seats when they accelerate. There are very few of these seat track testing facilities around. You may have seen, if you've been following the industry for a while, Recaro built one during COVID in their new facility, and Recaro, being a very large economy class seat maker, own most of the market in long haul, quite a bit of the short haul market. By most, I mean more than 50%. Less so in business class, but still big player there. Mirrors, who are a small UK slimline seat specialist, they built their own. Essentially, part of the problem is that the automotive industry, who used to have a lot of these, need to use them themselves to certify a lot of the new EV generation. And this is a Brexit problem. The seats that were previously just sort of hopping across the channel to a UK site or vice versa now can't hop across the channel because there are customs issues, and nobody wants their test seat to be stuck in customs limbo for 3 weeks to 2 months. All of which means that you run into these problems where the seat just gets delayed because you can't certify it. Now, you might then say to me, well, why is the front row not blocked off, but rows 2 and 3 are blocked off? That's a good question, and that's one that I haven't figured out the answer to yet. My presumption is it's got something to do with head strike. So essentially one of the things that you test for is that if the plane stops suddenly, i.e. crashes, or comes off the runway and people get thrown forward in their seats or whatever, the dummy in the test, i.e. the passenger, their head can't strike anything in the direction of travel, basically. And what that runs into is usually these days a very large in-flight entertainment screen. And as those screens got bigger, and as you might have noticed if you fly regularly, they've stopped being that kind of matte, dull texture like laptop screens used to be 10, 15 years ago, to the glossy texture that laptop screens and tablets are today. And as that happened, they lost quite a lot of the ability for that to be essentially a crumple zone. Right now, that's a shatter zone. And then so the shatter problem has been quite difficult. All of that is to say, that's why a lot of the seats are late. And that's why quite a lot of the planes are late, which is an ongoing problem with the industry. But it's not to do with any one seat maker or any one product.
So that's all really complicated. And there's a lot of stuff going on. And there are many moving parts, literally and figuratively, in this. But what I'm wondering is, did anything happen to necessitate this change in how seats are certified? Like, was there an incident that ended up changing regulations and laws, or did nothing happen and we ended up here anyway?
Very much the nothing happened, as far as I'm aware. Certainly on the EASA side, in terms of premium economy, there hasn't been a major crash where these seats have been discovered to be somehow unsafe or less safe than we thought.
Because that's happened before, right? With the Japanese seat manufacturer, where suddenly they all became pumpkins and you had to get rid of them. That's not the case here.
Right. So what you're referring to, I think, is the Japanese seat manufacturer Koito,
yes.
Now known as shamed Japanese seat manufacturer Koito, who falsified their safety testing and were found out.
But that's not the case here.
No, that's not the case here at all. It's a new seat, but it's a seat on which a lot of certification had already been done. It's this premium economy seat. It's got a shoulder belt, and the shoulder belt comes from Schrott, and Schrott are a very respected German engineering background company. They'd sorted out the testing of this seatbelt and seat combination a year ago. What this really does seem to be is regulators saying, actually, we're not going to take the paperwork proof anymore. You've got to do some physical testing. And that, I think, is what has happened, but to a different extent in the business class world. So on the business class side of things, as more planes have had suites installed, particularly what they call mini suites in regulatory parlance, right, which are basically just business class seats with doors on the side. There have been a lot of questions about how you certify those for emergency egress, right? So how to get out in a crash, basically. And regulators have been asking questions which have been answered on a per seat, per cabin, per airline basis by seat makers, which is why if you look inside a new business class suite, or you take 5 different suites from the same airline or from different airlines, there'll be a different sort of emergency handle or release to be able to get out of that seat in an emergency. And that's essentially the seat maker going to the regulator and saying, is this enough? Will this work? And the regulator going, I'm not sure. Can you make it red so it's really obvious? And them going, sure, absolutely. We can definitely do that as seat manufacturers. And that then going into service, and passengers think that the red handle is the one they pull to simply get out of the seat to go to the bathroom. And what that does is that then puts the seat into emergency mode, largely by taking it off the tracks. And so it has to be reset by crew, which is why you then end up hearing on the pre-departure briefing, please don't pull the red handle unless it's an emergency, because the crew get tired of having to go and reset your seat all the time. And the problem is that this is all done under what are known as special conditions by EASA. There's an FAA term which is essentially means the same thing, where you say, well, okay, there's nothing in the regulations that covers this sort of seat, but we think that an equivalent safety finding can be made if we do this. And by this, we can mean add an additional way of the door sort of falling off its hinges and still sort of being able to be retracted, by the door kind of snapping into, by a little panel opening up in the door that you can sort of come out of, like sort of Winnie the Pooh exiting Rabbit's house. Any number of things. Sometimes the answer is, well, we've made the wall of the seat low enough that you can clamber over it and that'll be fine in an emergency. All of this ends up meaning that it's a very manual process of getting these seats approved when there are egress problems to play with. And that takes time, that takes expertise, and the FAA has been particularly keen to be raising these issues. I'm not sure it's the best or easiest or most productive time to be an FAA employee this year. So I think that's another issue if you are having to deal with the storm in Washington at present. But I think that's a problem.
So is this how we end up with Lufthansa first flying an empty business class and then a business class with seats, but you're not allowed to sit in them except for the 4 up front? And then it seems like any kind of combination of you could sit here but not there, and please don't look at those seats because they don't exist. Is this just, it's all culminated in kind of everything we're seeing?
Lufthansa is its own special class of nightmare. So Lufthansa's first nightmare was that they were having problems with the certification of their first class cabins, which, as I understand it, was largely around decompression. Essentially, part of the issues with decompression is that you need the panels around the seats to allow for the air to blow in if the plane decompresses, right? Or to blow out if the plane decompresses, into the cabin, out of the suite sort of thing, without taking panels with it. And that, as suites have got higher, because the Lufthansa Allegris and Swiss sensors first, those suites have got higher, the walls have got higher, the doors have got bigger. So decompression was, as I understand it, a big part of that. Also, then they just ran into production issues and it was a nightmare. So they started flying the A350s that were supposed to have Allegris first without Allegris first. The first one had a very unwise loading symbol on the wall saying, coming soon, Allegris first class or something.
Buffering.
Yeah, which quickly disappeared once they thought that was a bit too on the nose. But yeah, that entire section just had a few economy class seats as handholds, basically, for the crew to be able to use to walk through. They then started getting those aircraft with first class delivered, and all was well until they were working on the 787. Lufthansa, in its wisdom, and that sure is a word, decided to have different seat manufacturers build the same seat on different airplanes with entirely different underpinnings from those manufacturers, not a common Lufthansa manufacturer.
This is the story of the 787 in a microcosm.
Yes, well, so if you think about it, it's essentially like you're building a stock car and the outside looks sort of similar, but the underpinnings are entirely different. What that ran into with the 787 is the same seat that Stelia had built for the A350 had very little relevance to when the Collins-built version of that seat for the 787 was coming up for certification.
So none of the prior work that had been done for certification for one seat was applicable to the other seat, basically, is what I'm hearing.
And there's a whole process with various coordinating meetings and revisions, and you leave time for this. And inside your seat company, you learn and you grow. And so as you do the first aircraft, or the first head of version, as it's known, right, which is the first one to come off the line, you learn things that you can then put into place. Like, we learned this for the A350, so when we build it for the 787, we'll have learned that. That just didn't happen in this case. And I think we've seen the impact of that, right? We're not entirely sure why the Lufthansa business class problem is the way round that it is. and nobody is talking, everybody's very stum about this. You would have thought that if this was an egress issue, it would affect the business suites, but not the regular business class seats. And that's not the case. In fact, it's the inverse. The business class suites are allowed to be sold, but the rest are not.
Of which there are only 4.
Yeah, there are 8 on the A350 because there are 2 cabins of business, but the 787 business cabin is smaller. So yeah, the entire rest of the business class cabin cannot be sold or sat in at present until they sort out the certification, which is obviously a giant problem because, they want to be able to sell business class, given that something like 75% of an airline's like Lufthansa's revenues will come from business class. Not having most of your business class cabin is quite the problem.
And I love how they're just like, well, we really want to put them in service, so we're just going to put them to the least revenue-generating cities possible, which turns out to be Montreal and Toronto.
That's not a revenue thing. That's because they have a lot of flights to Toronto and Montreal, including with their partner Air Canada, and they can balance and also you have the opportunity to route Air Canada customers who are connecting through Toronto and Montreal onto Lufthansa via other Star Alliance hubs.
Well, that's smart.
So yeah, exactly. It does make sense. And they used Montreal and Toronto as the kickoffs for previous generations of cabin as well. They did that with the Lufthansa cabins, which are the old Philippine Airlines cabins that Lift Aerodesign created.
Yes.
I think they sent those to Toronto. Then Allegris, I think, also started to Toronto or Montreal.
Vancouver, I think.
One of the ways around, it was definitely Canada to start with, right? So they obviously have some gentleman's agreement with Air Canada, but particularly the Canadian East Coast, because it helps because you can use one plane for a daily return and leave enough space in schedule for it not to be a nightmare if it gets delayed Norwegian style. And also because it's an Air Canada hub, and because you can also route the traffic that would have been coming across there through your other Star Alliance network options in North America. So yes, as I understand it on the Lufthansa side of things, it is a combination of known issues which have been picked up by the regulator, and by known issues I mean problems that we've experienced before on an industry basis that have not been able to be fixed in time, which sounds very similar to what Jevon is experiencing with the Air Côte d'Ivoire A330neo seats. All of which is to say, this is just another reason why the industry is so dependent on a shrinking number of seat makers. Right? Various acquisitions within the industry have happened, mergers, and there are fewer and fewer players. The players get bigger and bigger. The players then get a little bit too big to fail, and then also a little bit too big to bid on some of the smaller aircraft. Right? So that's why, for example, an airline like Air Côte d'Ivoire has some fairly standard but nicely customized Thompson seats up front, and then seats from Jevon in premium economy and economy, rather than somebody else like Safran or Collins or Recaro, right? It's the too few ship sets problem. And by ship set, we mean, full aircraft full of seats. The big fellas don't want to put all of the research and development into what is a very small number of planes total, right? It's only 2 aircraft. So you end up with a company like Jevon who have obviously not been certifying as frequently or as often as these large companies, and who then run into the problems that a Safran or a Recaro or a Collins might not end up running into.
Well, this is all extremely complicated and doesn't sound like there's a resolution coming next week. But John, if I wanted to learn more about this and stay probably more up to date than anyone should be, where can I go to find more about that?
You'll be delighted to learn that I have an option for you there. It is The Upfront. We are the home for in-depth, independent aviation journalism that covers the entirety of the passenger experience. Seats, cabins, lounges, the rest of the airline industry. Where people are going. We call this the contexts of travel, right? Because even one person as a business class traveller, say, will have an entirely different set of needs, wants, and expectations if they're travelling on a tight overnight to a business meeting versus with their family to a cruise holiday, say. And that's why we created The Upfront, to really talk about the aviation industry, to dive deep into seats and certification and really, quite frankly, nerdy things like that we all really enjoy talking about. And so, I'd love to offer the listeners of AvTalk a special 24% discount off a subscription.
I see what he did there.
Yeah. Because, our articles are long form. We write 4,000-word pieces about a topic, not just like a 500, 600-word thing that you can flick through in a couple of minutes. And we're entirely funded by our members right now at either subscriber or pro level. And subscribers get all of our articles plus our podcasts, and pros add any number of things, but largely our industry intelligence. So if you're sort of nodding your head, nodding along with us and going, oh yeah, we were talking about this in our ITCM, right? Or our meeting about airplanes. Well, Pro is for you. As it is if you're a regular flyer and you're like, actually, I do want to know the difference between these two types of seats and why it happens. So yeah, visit us at the upfront.media/FR24 for those 24% discounts. And yeah, we'd love to see you. Join us and figure out this industry together for sure.
I often find myself in meetings about airplanes. That was very, very specific, John. Thank you.
It's almost like a targeted audience here.
Weird.
We will put a link in the show notes to John's very gracious offer, and we will talk to John again soon as we move towards, hopefully, as an industry, figuring out how to put new seats onto aircraft and have them certified within
what a novel idea.
A decade, maybe?
Fingers
John,
crossed for sure.
It's always great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us once again.
My pleasure. Thanks, gents.
Welcome back, Jason. I am not encouraged at all about getting to fly on a new airline seat.
I love talking to John, but I don't like the bad news he brings. Everything's broken.
Everything is broken. Things that are not broken and that are kind of exciting. Air Canada has announced where it will head first after it takes delivery of the Airbus A321XLR.
Wait, are the seats certified?
Maybe
because they'd be one of the few XLR customers who actually have seats that are certified, looking at American and Delta.
They're going to send the first flights from Montreal to Palma de Mallorca, and then they will be doing a full year service because the Palma service is seasonal. Then they will be doing full year service from Montreal to Toulouse. I can only imagine what company might be interested in having nonstop service between Montreal and Toulouse.
It's unknowable, but it's the Toulouse one that's going full year. I put that in there because that's the benefit of the XLR. There's not enough demand full year for Air Canada's smallest wide body, the A330, but 321 XLR can do it all year round. So that's a nice Airbus shuttle bus on an Airbus because Boeing can't deliver a similar product
yet. Sort of.
One day, maybe.
Speaking of Boeing products, we've heard a lot from Southwest Airlines CEO Bob Jordan this week, who says they're still hoping eventually to take delivery of the 737 MAX. But he's also said some interesting things about where the airline could fly.
You just said MAX. They have MAXes. The MAX
7. MAX 7. Sorry. Yes.
You'd know you'd get an email, Ian, if you didn't correct that.
Yes.
Dear Ian, did you know that Southwest already has the MAX? How did you not know that?
Yeah. I thought they were flying A220s around.
The more you know.
So Jordan said that everything's on the table as far as Southwest going from what used to make it Southwest to ensuring that nothing that used to make it Southwest remains. So to that end, they're looking at flying to Europe and having lounges, because why not?
So Southwest just wants to become the all Boeing version of JetBlue, which is now, once again, for the first time in like decades, an all Airbus airline, which I forgot to mention earlier. Retiring the E190 makes JetBlue an all Airbus operator. It just seems like Southwest is copying JetBlue, which I'm not sure is the best idea right now, but sure, flights to Europe, lounges, USB ports, free Wi-Fi, bag fees. Not sure that customers want that one.
That's what Jordan says, though. Jordan says that they're giving customers what they want.
Bag fees? Sure. Southwest making up for a whole lot of lost time right here, real quick. Kind of like JetBlue. Never really thought about how the two have so much in common right now. Except one is doing it because it's not making any money. The other is doing it because an activist investor is pointing a gun at their head. And
saying you're not making enough money.
Yeah, kind of different circumstances.
But the same
outcome.
Well, let's wrap up this week's episode with a couple interesting stories that are interesting in different ways. And the first one comes to us from South Korea, where T-Way Air is rebranding to become Trinity Airways.
What?
I don't know.
Why?
But that's what they're doing.
Okay.
Yeah, Trinity comes from the Latin word trinitas, meaning three come together as one to form completeness. So the idea is that they are combining different holding companies and acquiring stakes in different companies. And through that, they are changing their name to Trinity Airways. I'm sure the customers will understand that. I feel like we're in a renaming area right now where airlines are renaming themselves from something that has some sort of root where they came from, where they operate, to things that don't mean anything. Nesma Airlines is rebranding as Fly Plus.
Sure.
So, I mean, they could be from anywhere.
Yeah, that's true. But what this does mean is we get a new livery out of them too. I mean, the rendering they gave us is of an A330neo, I believe, which apparently they have on order, I assume. Or this is a weird way of announcing they have A330neos on order.
Surprise.
It's fine.
Yeah, they take delivery of their first 5 in 2026. So they're waiting till next year to get that.
Fine. I have no real, I don't know. It doesn't evoke much emotion out of me, either positively or negatively.
There you go.
I feel no way about it whatsoever.
I'm happy to have brought out neutral feelings in you.
Mm-hmm.
Next story, bad news that it's happening. Good news that the FAA is doing something about it. The FAA is fining companies that are shipping lithium-ion batteries improperly. One of these fines stems from an incident on board as part of a FedEx shipment chain. They don't say exactly where the battery caught fire, but the battery caught fire and 3 batteries melted together as part of a 25 lithium-ion shipment for foam batteries. The batteries were not packaged properly, they were not declared properly, and they did not follow the rules. And so they are being fined, and there are a few other companies that are also being fined for not properly declaring that these are lithium-ion batteries being shipped and not providing the necessary paperwork and labeling. So good to see some enforcement action coming out of these.
Yeah, it's one day I feel like in the future, we're going to look back at our prolific use of lithium-ion batteries and just look at it and go, people really used to carry around portable bombs in their pocket all the time, and like sometimes it just exploded and melted together. Man, lithium-ion is batteries, they're dangerous stuff, and if companies are flying them around without even declaring that they're in shipments, that's all sorts of bad. So good on the FAA for doing something here.
Yeah. And in the last story we have this week, Jason, I regret to inform you that Virgin America, AirTran, Continental, and US Airways are no longer air carriers.
Oh, man, this is going to come as devastating news to hotel airline check-in kiosks all across the United States.
Did you know you can still fly on?
You can still fly Virgin America, AirTran, Continental, US Airways, and all sorts of other airlines that don't exist any longer. That's disappointing. So we're going to have to tell them that can't do that anymore.
Yeah. So this comes from the US DOT revoking their certificates earlier or late last week. Why that hadn't been done already?
So wait a minute. If United just one day last year woke up and said, "Now we're Continental again," they could have legally operated flights under the Continental Airlines name. Or if like Alaska was like, you know what, psych, we really love the Virgin America brand. We're undoing everything we did. We're Virgin America now. Really?
I mean, you would have to operate as them for this to happen. I mean, I'm sure you could paint Virgin America on one of the planes in it.
Well, yeah, but fine. You couldn't have operated as Virgin America.
No.
Huh. So someone basically went into a database and said, wait a minute, did we never press delete on these?
Yeah.
Huh. It's okay. They're going to live forever on third-party check-in systems.
This sounds to me, yeah, exactly. This sounds to me like somebody forgot to do something a few years ago, and they're like, oh, okay, let's just do it all in a batch. But goodbye, AirTran.
The intern told me he did them, and you know, they're still there. You can't trust them.
All righty, sir. I need to get packing, and a bunch of other stuff before we head out to California for the weekend. So I will see you there. But until then, this has been episode 336 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.